This screencast is going to talk about how you can configure a PA200 without the OBM system. This is for smaller installations. Maybe you just want to use password ID. Maybe you're just going to dial into the devices or use LTE with password ID. You can set these up for encryption, although it's a little tricky to do it that way. We would highly recommend using the OBM for that. But let me show you how to do this. So the way we do this is we use a script file. And the script file just has a couple of rules, just like any script file. And then we're going to have configuration parameters in here. Once we get this all in here, we're just going to highlight it all, cut and paste it. We're going to connect to a remote CDI device. We're going to log in using the admin credentials, which is going to then say, hey, do you want to load a config? And we're going to push this config in there. So anything with a hash mark is a comment. And anything capital letters followed by a colon is a label field. And there's a bunch of different label fields in here. If you're not going to use a label field, you can comment it out or you can just remove it. So there may be some things that you're not interested in using, like encryption, for instance, and you can just remove it from the file. And you can reuse this file on all your devices. You may want to have a separate one for each if you have minor changes like IP address, etc., etc. So we're going to come down here. The first field is device name, which is the name of the device. Device name capital followed by a colon. New line, the exact name of the device. Let's just call this PA200X. Let's save that. Okay. And ending with a semicolon and then new line semicolon. Now we're going to set up our admin credentials. Admin users are the ones that can load this file or display the contents of the device. I have 5 admin users in here. That's obviously way overkill. So the keyword is admin followed by a colon. Oh, and by the way, if you want a good tested script file, contact CDI support through the website comdevices.com. Go into the support center, open up a ticket, ask for a script file. We will send you a tested script file that you can then modify. So here we go, admin1 and password. These are obviously silly names to use. You wouldn't use admin1 comma password and by a semicolon. You would use something like with numbers and uppercase and lowercase and all things like that. But these are just examples that we are using so that it can be easily remembered. Okay. And there's typically you just put 1 or 2 admin password IDs. Each line ends in a semicolon. The whole section ends in a semicolon. And now we have the escape character. This is if you want to change the escape character. That's if you're in a menu. If you hit the escape, it will back you out to the previous menu. Some people don't want to use escape. They want to use control character. In that case, instead of escape with a semicolon here, you'd have the upper caret followed by the letter. That would be the control character that you're going to use. Okay, now we're going to configure users, and the keyword here, the label is users, uppercase followed by a colon, new line, and again I've used silly examples, user1 comma password, then comma all means you have access to all ports on the device. That's all the serial and all the power ports, followed by a semicolon. Down here for user 4, you'll see that this user only has access to host port 4, host port 8, and this user here, host 1, host 2, power 1, power 2. So this lets you granulate which ports the users have access to. And then also, this is set up for an 8-port device. Excuse me, no, we're not on that yet. But again, you would not use user1 and password. You'd probably use some employee number, comma, something else here. So those are users. Next field is encryption users. Not going to spend a lot of time on this. If you want to enable the encryption functionality, use the users underscore encryption followed by a colon, and then use same thing as before, username, password, and then the ports they're allowed access to. We highly recommend if you want to really take advantage of encryption, you should be using the OBM to configure your devices. We can now configure our host ports. You can have up to 8 host ports on a device. The field is uppercase hosts followed by a colon, new line, H1 through H8 equals the port name followed by a comma and the baud rate for the port followed by a semicolon. Here's the example baud rates you can use. Most of the time you're going to be 9600 because that's what most console ports default to. You can have up to 64 characters in these ports. Each line ends with a semicolon, section ends with a semicolon. Now we can also name the power ports. Again, P1 through P8, equal sign, label, comma, and then a number of seconds for a power cycle. What I was saying before is these are set up for 8 ports, which right now is our maximum. Actually, we're coming up with a 28-port device. But if you're going to program a 4-port device, it will just skip the last 4. So you can use the same file to program different size devices. Now we have primary and secondary message. This is a message that comes out when you first connect to the device. It's typically some kind of legal message, and then we ask you for your user ID. Again, section ends with a semicolon. We also have a secondary message. After you enter your user ID, this message comes out. Typically it's a legal message, and then we ask you for your password. Okay. We can also enter in network parameters. That's for the Ethernet port. So network colon is your keyword, new line IP address semicolon, new line net mask semicolon, new line gateway semicolon. Then you have client IDs. If you're taking advantage of encryption, you would have CDI client devices or head-end devices. You need the serial number of those devices followed by the keys that are in those devices. Now, again, these are bad examples of keys, and you also need to get these keys in those devices. If you send this file into that device, it will see its device serial number and it will get the adjacent key for that device. Again, this is a little more tricky. You probably want to contact support to do that. Lastly, if you want to use TACACS or radius authentication, here's the keyword, and you can see in here I have this shut off because I have the hash marks in there. IP address followed by the port, 49 is TACACS, 1812 is radius, and here's the key followed by that. The file must end with end colon and then followed by a semicolon. Okay, if you don't follow all these rules, it's not going to work. Again, if you want to omit an entire section, you can do that. You can either comment it out or you can just remove it. So now I'm highlighting the whole file and I'm going to copy it into the clipboard, and now I'm going to go connect to a remote device. So I happen to be connected directly to the APN, so I can connect over the LTE interface here, and it is okay. Now I am accessing directly over the LTE network, and I'm going to hit a remote device. I am going to use my administrator credentials, which are the default credentials, and those should be here, which are the MIN, capital ADMIN. I am then going to get prompted for, I want to load configuration. And if I right click here, it's going to begin transmitting that file. Each line that gets read in will get echoed back or reading data in this particular instance to the remote. Then when it's all done, it will kick the whole file back to me in this window, and it will disconnect the session, usually. Okay, it started coming back. Now because we went over the LTE interface, it dropped the connection, which I believe is still okay. And the way we're going to check that is we are now going to go back in. Well, first of all, I'm going to go on my hard network and I'm going to ping the network address that we put in there, which was 192.1.128. Okay, that does not appear to be pinging, but we may or may not have that connected properly. And did I have that in here? I certainly did. Okay, well, let's go back in and connect using and we should be able to use some of the new credentials that we put in there. Let's see what they are. User 1 and password, that should be relatively easy. User 1, PASSWRD. And there you go. So now we are in the device. Okay, so that's how you can configure the device using a script file, and if you save that, um, you will now, if you want to go back in there and change it, in fact, let's go back in now and connect using the new administrator credentials. So, which are ADMIN1 and PASSWRD. And there you go, it's going to show me. That's how I can load, or I can show the configuration that's in the device. Oh, it's 028. That I put the wrong address in there. That is a problem. So with that, what I can do now is say, okay, I put the wrong address in, so let's fix that. This should be a 1.128. Okay, so now let's go back here, copy, go in. I'm going to do a 1 for a load. I'm going to hit a right click. It's going to push that file out. Okay, everything's going to come back. File load's complete. Do that. And now if I ping on my local network here, ping 92. Sure enough, there it is. Okay, so that is how we do the file. Any questions? Contact support.